Yesterday was a wake-up call for everybody, both in DC and in state capitals all around the country, and in Olympia. And I'm sure the governor's office is having some discussions about how uh, the security at the mansion was breached. It was about 50 yards from my window, and I could watch things happen. And I will say this. Um, People should not be taking down gates. They were on the porch. It was a crowd that, on the governor's mansion side, wasn't intending violence because it would have been easy to perpetrate, and I'm very thankful for that. But I see that Sarah Gensler is here, and she took some very harrowing video, and it's not just about legislators. There's a whole bunch of things that play into this. It's about people's need and right to participate in the political process and engage in legitimate observation, input, and yes, protest. And it also, we've got to recognize that the safety of the press is just as important as the safety of anybody else. And all of us legislators are in a building with a whole bunch of security. And a lot of you are out there in places that are much higher risk. And I think all of us need to stand up for the press. I've said many times that I've never been mistreated in Washington by the press. If you're honest, and especially if you're honest about what you may have, the misstatements that you may have said, the people in Washington are going to treat you fairly. I'm confident, just like Lori is, and people should know this is a process where we all collaborate. Lori and I were on the phone yesterday while all this was happening, talking about security, and I spent some time with the chief clerk of the House yesterday talking that over. But it's not just the Capitol, it's the people outside the building too that count. That's a worthwhile question, but 140,000 people that we each represent expect us to do our jobs. And it appears that the Constitution requires this meeting to be in person. I, for one, would love to do it out on a farm, but this is where we're going to do it. And you know, you shouldn't run for office if you're not willing to take the toughest days, along with the days where you get a different kind of positive attention. You know, people forget that business time is very different from legislative time, and unfortunately, this is too late for a lot of businesses. In the legislature, you think you have 105 days sometimes, or you can always do it next year. Every single day that goes by, people are closing down. So we really want to join with all parties and all caucuses to move the things that are possible to move forward as quickly as possible. And I've mentioned many times that we wish we would have been able to come in earlier and do these things. Representative McEwen has a suite of bills that I've talked about quite a few times that directly impact the cash flow of business. And that's how businesses survive when the chips are down, is it's just pure cash flow. So we want to enact the McEwen bills or equivalent bills from any source. We should not care at this point who gets the credit. I think another really critical step that directly impacts the ability to reemploy people, because this is about people. Businesses are here to serve people, and a huge barrier has arisen because of both the reaction to COVID and the fraud that has taken place at ESD. And that is that many businesses are seeing 300 to 500% increases in their unemployment insurance rates, and we should use part of the rainy day fund to backfill that. This was caused not by the businesses. They didn't lay people off because they wanted to, and it's a bar to the survival of these businesses and the reemployment of people that want to get back and be productive. But the post-COVID economy, of course, we're Republicans. We think about the economy all the time. And I appreciate all the things that have been said. I am very aware, and I think my colleagues are, about the fact that in many cases, people of color are left behind in our economy, and many of these people that are people of color and left behind are represented by Republicans. And our members in Central Washington, like Alex Ibarra, Chris Corey, Matt Benke, they are steeped in economic recovery. And we have to remember, as I've brought up many times, that if we're going to lift all people, we have to be very sure that we are lifting the non-urban parts of the state and the small cities and small towns. And so many times we do things that may build the economy of the state of Washington in aggregate, but we leave these people and places behind. And I know that I've had a lot of talks with Alex Ibarra about this. He's determined to be a voice for those. And so we have a way of looking at equity that maybe is not exactly the same as everybody else, but I think it will serve people well in many cases. One other thing that I want to throw out there too, you know, when you're in the minority, you think about process a lot more, because if process is done well and if it's designed well, it protects the political minority. And I've learned a lot being in a political minority for 10 years. And one thing that I think is going to be important to both the Republican caucuses, and I think people in the majority caucuses as well, is we've now stress tested the emergency powers of the state. And clearly, the governor has to have emergency powers because things happen. But at the same time, we would like to see adjustments so that the legislature is involved, and it cannot go on in an indefinite way without having the involvement of all of the representatives of the people. So that's going to be a priority as well. Well, this is one of those places where I think in the past we've had some pretty amazing collaboration. Over the last few years, you saw the follow-up to I-940 and some pretty moving speeches on the House floor from the chairman of the committee, Representative Goodman, and the ranking member, someone who is a law enforcement officer, Representative Clippard, and they agreed tearfully in a couple of cases, because these are moving things, and you learn so much as you start to understand how differently we can perceive the way that law enforcement works. And so we have designed our public safety committee in a way to be as collaborative as possible. At the same time, I've had a lot of law enforcement officers in my caucus, and I have found the ones that I know to be really amazingly sincere public servants, and their input is extremely important to us, as well as the people that they're supposed to keep safe and the people that have been victimized when things have gone wrong. So I have not gone into great detail in this policy now, because I've found in my life in the legislature that the hearing process is among the most educational things that can happen. And I'm looking forward to extensive hearings in this. I understand that they're going to happen early. And I think for those that pay attention, every single one of us is going to learn things that we didn't know about the experience that other people have. And I've been blessed, honestly, by a 3-hour conversation one time with Nate Miles, who a lot of you know, who told me what it was like for him as a Black man growing up in the South in the 60s. Not something that I would have learned growing up on the farm in Roy. So we've all got something to learn. I am very hopeful that collaboration is going to be productive, but I'm not ready to say that I've got a position on bills that have been dropped now, because they may very well change, and I hope they will, based on input of many. You know, I said a little bit earlier, the governor needs to have the power to respond to emergencies, but it shouldn't have no limit. At this time, it's defined as the extent of the emergency until the emergency ends. And it doesn't say, you know, when that happens. We don't know when that happens yet. You know, most of his emergency powers are established by law passed by the legislature going back to the 80s. So it absolutely has been within the purview of the legislature to talk about emergency powers, and it should be in the future. So I hope that that's not off the table. And actually, yesterday was the first day that I had heard about the joint rules challenge. It never has been called into session by just the legislature. I hope that we can make that easier to do in the future, but that doesn't mean that we can't talk about these legislatively established rules for emergencies.